Hey guys, it's Heather Olson Beal. Um, I'm gonna just page through a couple different things that we did at the new faculty development series on October 31st. I'm sorry it's taken me a couple weeks to get this together, but hopefully this will be a quick and easy way to kind of get this checked off your to-do list. So we talked about assessment basics, and I'm just going to run through these slides quickly. And then I also had Megan Weatherly come to talk about some things that she does, particularly with discussions, assessing discussion boards in online courses. Although I think the things that she shared also apply to face-to-face courses. And then Mary Catherine Breen also came to talk to us about a really interesting assessment thing that she's using. I emailed everybody an article that talks a little bit about team-based learning, and she was showing us how she makes these quizzes. And this is terrible. She makes the quizzes using an app, and then she has the students work on them individually, and then she grades them using right in class, just as students are turning them in. She grades them, and then she gets immediate feedback. And then she has them work on the quizzes in groups, and she has these little scratch off quiz things that she gives them. It's very interesting. If you're interested in hearing about that, I can get you the contact information for what Mary Catherine does, because I'm obviously butchering trying to do a recap. So I just want to cover a few things about assessment. We talked briefly about the purposes of assessment. We talked about how assessment is both to figure out how much the students know and what they're able to do, and also to give us feedback as teachers, as professors, to know what we need to do better and what we need to reteach or address from a different angle. We also talked about how sometimes assessment is used as a punishment. Um, so, maybe you feel like your students aren't reading or they're not coming to class prepared, or I explained that I have done this before, not for a long time because I think it's bad, but I have done it. And I would feel frustrated with the students. And when I taught high school, if I felt like there were behavior problems, sometimes I would just get frustrated and say, okay, fine, everybody put their books away. We're going to have a quiz. I mean, so kind of my purpose then wasn't really to assess, it was to punish and kind of manipulate students into behaving better or preparing better. And I don't think that's a great use of assessment for obvious reasons, but I think it happens a lot. We talked about doing different kinds of assessment. Yeah, whom do we assess? Meaning we assess our students. Sometimes they assess themselves. Sometimes they also assess each other. And then sometimes, hopefully, we should also be assessing ourselves and finding ways for students to give us feedback also. We talked about backwards design, which is just a very basic fundamental thing about assessment, where you start with what you want your students to be able to do, and then you decide how they will show you whether they know it or can do it. What does the evidence look like? In what format is it? And then you plan what you're going to do with them. So sometimes I think we get into this trap, and sometimes it's maybe because we're busy and just life, but we just kind of go into class and we do our thing. We have our topics, we talk about things, we lecture, we put them into groups, or we have them discuss things. And then when it comes time for a test, then we are like, okay, well, what's important? What did we learn? What did the students read? And then we make the test. But what we should be doing is starting with the end in mind, or at least that's what the premise is of backwards design. We talked about formative assessment, which happens kind of during instruction, and which is used for students to figure out where they are, and also primarily for for teachers to figure out what do my students need to know and how are they doing. It's low stakes. We talked about low stakes testing, meaning, or not testing, assessment. Low point values where it doesn't stress them out. In the book Cheating Lessons, which is an interesting book, what I've read of it, it talks about how if you want to avoid cheating, the two most important things you need to do are to assess more frequently. so that a student's whole grade doesn't ride on, 3 tests, and that you need to do more low stakes assessment, and that those are the best ways for you to avoid cheating. Summative is what we tend to think of more with when we think of assessment or test, where the primary purpose is to measure what they've done. It's higher stakes, but there's all different kinds of summative assessment. We talked a little bit about grading rubrics. I can send this out because there's some good, as I was preparing this, I stumbled across some good resources. We talked about using your feedback to students to teach, not just to justify your grade. So think, if you're providing feedback, I want my feedback, yes, it will give them a grade, but I also want it to point them towards, I want it to have learning utility also. Avoid checks and X's, and actually provide feedback that is meaningful, not like good work or good job. And I find that difficult to do, particularly when I'm grading things online. It's really easy to just say good job, but that's not really valuable feedback for them. Focus on the big things when you're grading that are the most important to you, and less of the small things. Also, I think this is just a life management thing. If you focus on too many small things, it's like a black hole. Read through several responses to a particular question before you begin grading. Same thing with number 7. Grade exams by question. So you grade all of question 6 or all of question 9 rather than the whole exam. And then go back and review the first few responses you graded and see if you would still stick to those. We talked, and Megan talked about this a little bit too, keep track of, and so did Norm, keep track of common problems, and then either online or in a face-to-face class go back and say, well, these are some common issues that came up, and kind of outline those, and that'll save you from having to comment, make the same comments over and over and over. This I thought I found some interesting sources that I'll point to here in just a second. Try to get the students to have an active role in getting feedback from you. You can do that by, if you're kind of doing a mastery orientation, which I know not everyone does, allowing them to submit a piece of a work, a draft, or like the second bullet point says, they submit it once and you give them more feedback. And then when they submit it a second time, they're only getting a grade. I know of a faculty member who teaches big history courses. This is my dad, actually. And he'll teach freshman history courses that have 100 people in them, and he does a lot of writing. He's done writing intensive courses. I can't believe he does that. And he wants them to work on their writing. So he has found, I've never tried this, that there's just too many things that he, would want to correct. So he'll read through a student's essay at the beginning of the semester, the first one they do, and he'll pick one thing, a writing thing, not the content, one thing for them to fix, and he'll write it at the top, and then he keeps that in a chart. And then when they submit a second essay, that's all, again, not the content, but in terms of the writing, that one thing is the only thing that he's looking at. So if the students have a problem with comma usage, then that's the one thing that he marks. And he's been teaching for 40 years, that they will improve on that one thing, that giving them that one specific feedback and that one goal is a manageable task for them, and that they do get better on that one thing. Let's see if I can get this to come up. These are some self-assessment activities which I thought were interesting, and are some things that I want to try. Pause. Sorry, I didn't anticipate that happening. These are some interesting ways for you to get students to think about what they're doing themselves, and kind of do some, self-evaluation. So let's say, here, I'll highlight this one. Ask students, if they're submitting a paper, to underline or somehow otherwise mark the best sentence or the best section, and then leave that one alone. And then have them underline or mark the part or the question or the thing that they struggled with the most. and then try to help them with that. So I kind of like that idea because it's trying to get them to think about to assess their own work. Similar thing with an exam. Let's say you give an exam. Have everybody, a lot of people miss number 10. Have the students in that moment go back and look at their notes for the day or days that you talked about that, and then ask them to look at what they wrote that day. Did they note it down? And then compare. You can also have students, like this says, find the notes of a student that takes really good notes, and then maybe put those up on a projector and say, here are the things this, or you could have a note taker do it. Here are the things that this person took down. Did you get this? What do your notes look like? Kind of just to try to get them to, again, assess their own involvement in it, I guess. Same thing with the class discussion, whether online or face to face. Okay, we had a lecture, we had a class discussion. How many times did you participate? How many times did you raise your hand? Did you raise your hand to ask a question? Did you raise a hand to contribute? How do you feel about that? How well did you listen? Just again, to try to get them thinking, what am I doing in this class? How am I using my time? I just thought those were some good ideas. Then I also have a whole bunch of links here that I think are good. Megan's stuff, I'm not Megan, so I'm just going to click through her slides, were primarily number 1, if you're going to do online discussions, make sure you establish ground rules. Tell them how to do an online discussion. Tell them what a good online discussion looks like, in your opinion. I think something weird just happened with my recording. Okay, establish ground rules. Show what a good response looks like. Tell the students precisely what they need to do to have good participation in your discussion. She talked about not making them guess and explaining it carefully. She also talked about making the credit reflect the value in it. She says they see, over at OIT that people will have these discussion boards that aren't worth anything. Well, the students can figure that out. So if you want them really to engage in a discussion, you need to make it worth enough points or enough of a percentage of their grade that it reflects how important it is to you. If it's just a 10-point thing out of 1,000 points in a course, you're probably not going to get great participation. Another good point was, if you're going to be doing a discussion, whether face-to-face or online, a discussion is something where there are infinite answers. If you're setting up a discussion and there's a right answer, then it's probably not worth setting up a discussion board for. That's something more appropriate for a multiple choice question or a true-false question. And then Megan talked about what's working for her. She started doing voice feedback in D2L. I haven't tried this yet, but she said she's liking it, and a lot of her students are really liking it. She also has several due dates, so she'll have a discussion board that will go for 4 or 5 days, and the students she tells them they have to participate on 2 different days or on 3 different days. They can't just come in once right before, at 11:59 or whatever and post and run. She also talked about how she thinks it's good to have the students do something first and then do the discussion about it. So that there's kind of a task associated with the discussion rather than just a discussion. And then she talked a little bit about having the students work in collaborative documents. She has like a document in her course that says what worked for you in this online class, and then the students go in and post, and then she shares that with future classes. She was also considering doing having students participate, like record their discussion board responses and doing it via voice rather than via text, which is kind of interesting. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up because 15 minutes is the max. So this is Megan's contact information. If you wanted to get some more information from her, I'm going to try to wrap this up and email it to you guys. So thanks for being willing to listen to me for 15 minutes.